Yeah, I think it's gotten hard at several points within the role, but that's kind of the transitional points that are really important. When everything is going very easy and smooth, there's not a lot of growth happening. So I find that whenever I do have like a lot of pressure on me or I'm in a hard place, that's when the most growth happens, within myself and then within the company and just me growing into this role.
All right, so I've just wrapped up an amazing episode with Jordan Marksberry, who is the operations manager for the Growth Cave. And Jordan is one of the most talented operations people I've met. And he's only 20, which blows me away. They're running a company that'll do about $20 million in revenue this year, maybe a little bit more than that. He was employee number one. He's still the operations manager working with the two CEOs, running now a 43-person company. They're adding 10 more employees this month. You're going to love his mindset around growth, around leadership, around delegation, and even some of his thoughts around automation and leveraging technology. I think you're really going to love this episode. I was super excited to have him on as a guest, but just to sit and be able to learn from him and listen to what somebody who's only 20 years old is doing is really kind of extraordinary. We're also really excited that he is a COO Alliance member as well. So you'll enjoy the podcast. Hopefully we will have you listening to many more after this one as well. So Jordan, welcome to the Second in Command podcast.
Thanks, Cameron. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to this. I'm going to start with kind of what our viewers, some of the people are actually watching on YouTube, many are listening on all the different channels, but if you're not watching, you won't see how young you are. And you set the new record as one of our COO Alliance members. A couple of years ago, I was really excited. We had a member who was 26. I'm like, it's amazing. Our oldest member is 62. Our youngest is 26. And then all of a sudden you came along, and how old are you?
I'm 20 now. When I had joined the COO Alliance originally, I was 19, which maybe sounded kind of ridiculous, but yeah, I'm 20 now.
Yeah, you're 20 years old. 19 did sound completely ridiculous, but you were just operating at a completely different level, and you're running a real company. Like, how many employees do you guys have now?
So we're currently at 43. Actually, as of this morning, we just onboarded 2 new employees, and we're looking to bring on about 10-ish to our sales team in the next month or so. So we're at 43 right now, but we're growing very quickly.
Okay. So one of the things that we bump into a lot with just COOs or seconds in command is the imposter syndrome, right? Where they wake up every morning, the company is kind of the biggest thing they've ever run. It just keeps getting bigger. And often leaders feel like they're not qualified to do the job, or they're wondering how they got in the position. Is that something you struggle with? To what extent, and then how do you work through that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And you mentioned earlier, what would be a home run question? I think it might be exactly this, because I feel like I'm the perfect person to answer. I feel like coming into this role, I just had no ego, which is why I don't really deal with imposter syndrome too much. And I remember when I had first joined the COO Alliance, that's kind of what it started to creep up. And I'm seeing all these other COOs, and I'm seeing all these people who 100 plus employees, they're doing $100 million a year. And I was intimidated at first, but then I started attending the meetings and I was hearing the questions that they're asking. And I realized, like, man, these people are dealing with the same problems that I am. They're having the same problems with employees or tracking or just systems that they're using. Even like small things, I realized they're asking the same questions that I am. And that pretty much completely removed any like imposter syndrome feeling that I have. But really going into the role, I would say just having no ego and being somebody who is willing to learn really anything throughout the process helped me a ton.
And do you think you came into it with no ego because you knew you were young and you knew you were doing something that was big? Or why do you think you came into it with no ego?
I would say maybe because I had no expectation, especially when I had started in the role. We were a much smaller company. I was literally employee number 1, right? And now we have like 43 employees. So we've grown pretty quickly. Maybe it was just my expectations going into the role, but at the same time, I was really just a sponge. Now, I was 19 when I had started in the role. So I was really just eager to learn any and everything possible just surrounding operations and the role that I was about to take on.
Now, are you in college? Were you in college? Or did you avoid college? What was your path there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually did go to college for a year, and I was doing sales for 2. So funny enough, my senior year of high school was right around the time of COVID, and I had gotten into high ticket sales. So that's kind of what got me into this industry. And I'd done sales for 2 years and I did pretty decent at it. And I had ended up dropping out of college, moving to Atlanta. And it was about 6 months into that journey that the company I was with just kind of crumbled apart. And I had never imagined myself in an operations role before. I'd actually applied and messaged Lucas, who was our CEO, to become a sales rep. We did an interview and he was just like, hey, you know what? I think you might be good at operations. And so that's a really good judgment call on his end, just seeing that potential in me. And obviously it spread into something great. Now we have 43 employees. We did 2.5 million last month and we're growing very, very quickly. He just kind of recognized that in me. So I did go to college. I ended up dropping out after having done sales for 2 years. And then I went into the operations role.
What do you think he saw in you? What do you think he identified in someone that was young that he would, again, admittedly, the company was small and young at the same time, but what did he see in you that he entrusted you with some of the operations in the early days?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question. And honestly, I wouldn't be too sure, but I would say like from my perspective, it might just be like the mindset that I had or the questions that I was asking. And really like the eagerness I had going into the role, because he did give me a choice. He said, you can do sales. You'd be starting out as a setter, which didn't really interest me too much, or you can go into operations. When I was at the company doing sales, I was kind of doing everything else as well. We were very small. We were doing about 250,000 a month. There's only 2 sales reps on the team. And I was also managing like email marketing. I was working through Zapier. I was building stuff on the back end, really just for fun. Like I wasn't getting paid for it. And that was something that had always interested me, but I never really had it as like a skill. So it was definitely something new. And I think Lucas just had that like spark of genius. He saw the potential and it ended up working out, but I didn't really know much going into the role. So a lot of the stuff I've learned along the way.
Has it been easy the whole time? Did it get hard at some point in the role? Where do you think things transitioned there, or how they?
Yeah, I think it's gotten hard at several points within the role, but that's kind of the transitional points that are really important. When everything is going very easy and smooth, there's not a lot of growth happening. So I find that whenever I do have like a lot of pressure on me or I'm in a hard place, that's when the most growth happens, within myself and then within the company and just me growing into this role.
So where specifically have you grown, and where do you think you're struggling? Not struggling, but where are you growing today? Because I think as leaders, we're always growing, right? As the company scales, we continue to scale. So where have you worked on your skills? Where have you grown, and what are you really working at today?
Me now versus where I was a year ago is a complete day and night difference. And anybody in our company will tell you that, especially Lucas, because he's seen me since the very beginning. I would say it's really just changes in my mindset as like a leader and the way that I'm presenting myself to the team and the kind of the role that I hold with the team. When I first started, maybe it wasn't imposter syndrome, but I just didn't feel like I had the authority to do certain things. And, as we've grown, as we've hired more employees, as I've done hundreds of interviews, that's changed quite a bit. So I would say it's really just like having more authority and stepping more into like that leadership mindset instead of just being another person on the team.
And how do you face the kind of obvious, the elephant in the room, right? Are most of your employees young, so the age doesn't matter? Or do you have any like employees that are in their 50s, 60s that are looking at you going, how am I reporting to you? Or reporting to someone who's reporting to you?
So that's also a great question, because I think about that all the time. And I think it's kind of funny because none of our employees are really around my age. And we have one other guy that was the guy that I was doing sales with before, and he's also 20, right? So that's the only other one that's really around my age. Most of our employees, they're late 20s, mid 30s. We have some in their 40s, almost 50s. Nobody quite there yet, but I haven't run into a single issue with that. And that's why I think it's so funny, is because, I am 20, but yet all the employees under me, they have complete like respect for my authority and my decisions. And we work very well together. It's actually never been an issue, which I find very interesting, but I'm also very grateful for.
So I've said for years that, the 50-year-old who's saying they've got 30 years experience has really got 5 years experience 6 times in a row. And that he's going to bump into a 25-year-old who's got 5 years experience and the technology experience to kick his ass. Do you think that's something that you're bringing to the table because of your age, or that you have just learned technology and are bringing that into the company? Is that helping to keep you elevated?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's what helped me land the role in the first place. So I think that I had kind of that skill set already, which is what got me here. And then I think the mindset that I had developed throughout, the beginning of the role is what got me to the next part of it, which is stepping into like that second in command position and leading the company, right? Yeah, I would say that it's that I had that in the beginning, kind of combined with the other skills that I developed over time. But it definitely wouldn't have been possible without the technical aspect and the technical skills that I've had.
So what advice would you give somebody who's 50 that's showing up in the office on a day-to-day basis? What do they have to do to start getting ready for the next 5 years of their career?
Definitely a tough one, but I would say really just learning in as many areas as possible, because the skills that I had technologically that helped me in this role are things that I had learned from kind of all over. I had previously had like a reselling business where I sold sneakers, right? So I learned a lot of like spreadsheet stuff. I had, spent like years editing videos and doing photography when I was in school. So I learned a lot of like the software side of things. And there was a lot of little side things that I had done in the past where I was learning like 1 or 2 things that would lead into this role. So I would say it's just kind of taking everything from maybe those past like 5-year terms that you've had, applying those to the role that you have now, because I realized a lot of the stuff that I had already learned, or a lot of the stuff that I already knew, was able to be applied to this, even if it was in a completely different like industry or niche or field that I was working in.
So a last question kind of about the age-related stuff and about the learning stuff is your parents. I'm sure you came because you're a smart young man. I'm sure you came from a family that thought you were going to be kind of a university grad and off to do your MBA kind of thing. What did mom and dad have to say about you dropping out of university after first year?
They definitely were not very happy. I would say they still aren't, they still want me to go to school, but they are very supportive now. So both of my parents were in the military, could never really afford to go to school. So for me, it was kind of like the precedent that you're going to go to school, but you're going to go get a college degree because we couldn't. I'm grateful that my parents were able to put me in a position where I was able to go to school for free because of the military and because of their support. But I just really realized it wasn't for me. And they just kind of told me like, okay, that sounds good, but it's time to get out. So I ended up moving out right after I had dropped out of college, like that summer, moving to Atlanta. And now I'm actually living in Austin, Texas. So they are very supportive. It's been about 2 years since then. But yeah, it was definitely a fun talk that we had back then.
So the whole story about Gen Y and Gen Z being unable to launch and unable to leave home is clearly not true because you're already done and out the door and off in your career. Tell us about the company. What's Growth Cave do?
Yeah, so Growth Cave, we have a few different offers, but our main offer, our Knowledge Business Accelerator, we really help coaches and consultants scale using YouTube ads. We have a very simple process that we follow. And Lucas, our CEO, he's really a genius when it comes to just scaling courses and YouTube ads in general. So we apply like a lot of our frameworks to their business. Really anybody that has an online coaching or consulting business, or maybe like an in-person one that they want to take online. I think one of our clients is a perfect example where he's had a sciatica clinic or just like a chiropractic clinic for like the last 30 years. And he recently took his course online. And I want to say he's doing 6 figures a month in sales using our templates and frameworks from taking his just small like chiropractic clinic, turning it into an online course of like how to relieve back pain, how to relieve like years of sciatica following this simple process. So really we're applying our templates and our frameworks to different coaches and consultants businesses that are already existing.
And you guys are in a space that would be kind of digital marketing, right? You'd kind of be a digital marketing agency of sorts. How do you say no to all of the other products and services that exist in the digital space and stay so niched?
Yeah, I think we say no a lot because we know that what we have works, and we also know that what we have, we really excel at. Like I mentioned, Lucas is an absolute genius when it comes to marketing. And then on the flip side, we have Ozzy, Lucas's partner, who is an absolute genius when it comes to the mindset. And that's kind of exactly what our clients need. They need the mindset portion because they're running a business full time. And they also need the marketing to, be able to actually drive like the traffic and sales. So we know what we're good at, and we just kind of stick to that.
And what about working with founders? You've got 2 founders that you work with right now. How do you balance that?
Yeah, so I think we have a really solid dynamic, just with the 3 of us. Lucas and Ozzy, I really look up to them in many, many different ways. And they've really been the 2 main people that have just pushed me to like this level of growth. We work very well together. And actually, funny enough, tomorrow, we're all going to be in LA together. So, we have a really good balance when it comes to just flipping a switch of, being able to just kind of hang out and, have a conversation at dinner that's not work related to the next day we're on our meetings, we're going over everything that needs to be done. But I would say a lot of the times, Ozzy and Lucas, they kind of just throw their ideas at me. And then from there, it's, up to me to implement those and delegate them to the team.
Okay, so that was actually what I was going to ask, that you're fairly pragmatic and practical and fairly logical. It seems like you're also fairly systems focused, and you're dealing with 2 founders that are, well, one for sure that is very entrepreneurial, very scattered, and ADD in the most perfect way as an entrepreneur. And that would be Lucas, right? Or no? I guess Ozzy is probably the more scattered of the 2, isn't he?
Ozzy, I would say, is definitely scattered when it comes to his ideas, but that's really where like the genius comes with
Correct.
Just throwing ideas on the table.
It's like the perpetual motion machine that he's just seeing all the opportunities. So how do you take all of those opportunities and decide which ones to work on now? How do you say, hey, those are great ideas, but not yet? How do you push back against that? How do you balance them all? How do you take care of them when they're coming at you so quickly?
Yeah, I would say when it comes to the big ideas, those are things that we really sit as a team and work through together. So, we'll be on Zoom sometimes for hours, just kind of working through these things, laying out our plans for the next month, the next 3 months, the next year, or even where we see ourselves like 5 years down the line. When it comes to those big things, we try to lay them out more on a timeline. But when it comes to the small things, I'd say there's a lot getting thrown at me each day where, Lucas will message me with this idea. Then we hop on a Zoom and Ozzy has this. And then working on a project, but Ozzy gives me a call and he wants this stat audit or just something of that sort. There's a lot of small things coming throughout the day, which I would say has forced me to really get in the mindset of being able to delegate more to my team. And this is actually a golden nugget that I gotten from you, is that it needs to get done, but not by me. I've been using that a lot more recently. So when it comes to the small things, I've delegated a lot of those to the team and really like building up our management. But when it comes to the big projects, we work very well on those together because we really set everything on a specific timeline for when it needs to be done.
How has your role changed over the last year in the growth that you've gone through? What's your role? How's your role iterated or changed?
I mean, my role has changed like completely. It's basically day and night from what it was. I started out more of just like an operations assistant, and really it was just me stepping into the role of kind of managing everything internally. When I had first started out, I was, managing calendars for the sales team. I was doing like stat tracking for our sales team. I was helping on our client success meetings. I wasn't really helping too much with the client success side of things. I was really just doing the things that Lucas didn't want to do at the time. And I had just kind of stepped more into the role of working on bigger projects, taking on bigger tasks, and then over time coming up with my own ideas and implementing those things. I would say over the last year, the roles changed quite a bit, especially because we've had to hire more people. So, that's forced me to become more like a leader and a manager at the same time.
And do you think that was what has kind of elevated you in your role then, was just taking more and more responsibility off the two founders' plate so that it ended up on yours?
Yeah, exactly. Because when I had started, like I said, I was just kind of doing the things that Lucas didn't feel like doing. But over time, I started taking more of the things off his plate that maybe were pretty important, but it was more important for him to focus on like the marketing side, which is what he's really great at. Yeah, I would say it's just as more responsibility came, I've adapted and really just improved myself throughout the process. And like I mentioned earlier, without that, I wouldn't be here. Without like the mindset of like constant growth and constant improvement, or having those hard conversations to force that, I definitely wouldn't be here. So yeah, it would just come with the responsibility that's been put on my plate.
So you've mentioned a lot about learning and the constant growth. Where do you learn? And I know some of it you said is by doing some of the different roles and stuff over the past, but is there somewhere that you turn to for learning?
Yeah, I would say I learn a lot from Lucas and Ozzy, but when it comes to things that I'm working on my own, I kind of just learn any and everywhere that I can. I'm constantly looking to other members in like the COO Alliance, for example. I'm constantly reading books. I'm constantly watching YouTube videos. And honestly, looking a lot outside of our own industry, I think that's helped me a ton, seeing how businesses that might be completely different than ours, like Whole Foods, for example, a grocery store, obviously not running their business the same way as us, but I look to a lot of other companies to see how they're running. And I think that has helped me a ton because I see that just similar to the COO Alliance, they're dealing with like the same issues and they're asking the same kinds of questions that I am. So I would say it's really just like soaking up knowledge anywhere that I can.
Where do you think your blind spots are right now? Do you have any ideas of where your current weaknesses are, or stuff that you're going to need to start working on?
Yeah, I would say one current weakness that I've been working on more is just being more proactive rather than reactive, especially as we scale, because there's small problems that pop up every single day. And it's easy for me to feel like I have to be the person that deals with them all myself, right? For me, it's just leaning more on the team that I have below me to get certain things done. So that way I can focus on making the company and making our managers more proactive rather than just being reactive to every little problem that comes up. But I would say that's been my biggest weakness that I've been working on recently.
So you've mentioned the COO Alliance a couple of times as a kind of something that's been good for you in your growth. How are you going about extracting the most value from the COO Alliance? I mean, there's things that we do and we run, but how are you trying to draw the most from it?
Yeah, I would say it's just asking any question that comes to mind, even if it seems small. When I'm with my accountability group, for example, I'll just say, how, or why this, or why not that? Even if they're questions where I don't really know where I'm going, it just gives me more insight to like their thought processes. So like I mentioned, even if another business in another industry isn't similar to us at all, I can still take a lot away from that. Same as if I'm asking questions to other COOs, right? Like I'm digging into the way that their mind works, the way that their thought process is going on certain topics that we're discussing. So I would say it's just asking like as many questions as possible and really digging on those.
Interesting. I call it ideas having sex, that you take an idea from one area, idea from another area, and those ideas spawn into something else, right? That they don't necessarily have to be a linear path. You mentioned about kind of leaning out into the future and being a little bit more strategic and trying to, I guess, be more proactive with some of your decisions. How is it you're going about that?
Yeah, I would say it's really just been more of a mindset shift. Also, like I mentioned earlier, leaning more on the team below me. So, we're constantly just focused on building like that middle management team recently, especially because, we're growing to about 50 employees. And by the end of this month, we'll be over 50. So right now we're at kind of that inflection point of growth where we need to develop that middle management team because it can't just be Lucas and Ozzy and then me, right? We need to have other people in places to manage those lower level employees. So I would say it's leaning more on my team and then also just making that mindset shift of just focusing on being more proactive rather than reactive. So when certain situations come up, getting them completed, but then also making sure that we're not having to deal with them again.
Love it. One of the big struggles for COOs tends to be their CEO. We have different personality profiles in our CEOs and you kind of have to lead them a little bit. So can you speak to how you've had to lead both Ozzy and Lucas? How have you had to influence them and kind of stick handle them a little bit?
Yeah, I would say that we don't have much conflict on our management team, but in a way that I would have to lead them would be kind of just the mindset that I bring to the table because we're all very different personalities and avatars. And I would say that I think much more analytically. I'm very like orderly, very clean, very organized, and I'm thinking along like spreadsheets and numbers. So I would say that that's kind of what I bring to the table versus, Ozzy, who just has his ideas and his visions for the company. And then Lucas, who's really a genius when it comes to like marketing and the business and really just growing the company. So I would say for me, me, it's just bringing more of like an aspect where, just a different personality. I'm like more organized, more orderly. I'm thinking like along the lines of numbers. So I would say it's just the conflicting personalities there that have helped us.
I know one of the things that we've done at the COO Alliance is the Kolbe profile. Do you know what your Kolbe A profile is?
I actually don't.
You don't? Okay. I'm curious if you do yours, let me know what it is. My gut is that you'll have a very high first two numbers. The first number is the kind of leading with asking a lot of questions. And the second is putting systems in place to initiate starting of projects. That it feels like you won't start a project until you've asked enough questions to truly understand it all. And then there's a system in place to scale it. Whereas somebody like Ozzy, it's like, I'll start now and plan later, which is again, the entrepreneurial way, right? In mentioning that you have different personalities, have you guys done personality profiles, any of them as a team? And how have you kind of diagnosed each other's different personalities and styles?
So we haven't necessarily done specific personality tests. We had done one like a year ago, and Lucas had like ordered these tests, but we just found it didn't really give us too much of what we were looking for. I've done like the Myers-Briggs personality test. I honestly don't know what Lucas and Ozzy's personality types are. But it's very clear when we walk into a room, people kind of wonder like why we're together, right? We have Ozzy, myself, and Lucas, and we're just all completely different avatars, but we end up working really well together.
You had to adapt your style a little bit? Or is it just more recognizing each other?
Yeah, I would say no. I think it's because we're all so different that we complement each other in ways that really help the business grow, especially Lucas and Ozzy. As partners, it's very important to have that. And then they can kind of pass their ideas down to me to implement with the rest of the team. So I think it's because we're so different that we do work well together. If we were the same person, we would probably get in arguments all the time and then one of us probably wouldn't be here. So I would say I really haven't had to change too much. And one thing that Ozzy's really big on is really just polishing our employees, not like changing who they are, not changing like what they believe, but really just taking off layers of baggage or past experiences that have held them down and showing them their true potential. So I would say I'm still me, but it's really just me being the best version of myself in the areas that I really excel. So just focusing on what I'm great at while they can focus on what they're great at.
There's a leadership model out there where leadership teams kind of go through a model or a cycle, and it's called the forming, storming, norming, performing model. That when you kind of forming is when you're getting together as a team, and then it's the storming where you kind of work through all this shit, and then you kind of develop these kind of cultural norms and the ways that we do things. And once you figure that out, then you kind of just start performing to the next level. And it feels like you guys are at that stage now where you all just understand. Do you have clear roles and job descriptions and reporting and org charts, or do you operate without those?
Yeah, we definitely do. So, we have clear division between our departments. We do have like an org chart. And we are very serious when it comes to just making sure that expectations are very clearly outlined, or at least I am. When it comes to like onboarding new employees, I don't want there to be any questions or confusions. And obviously, like they can ask questions as they're getting onboarded into the role, but it's important to me to make sure that everything is very clear from the start. So that way there's no miscommunication.
So what are the different technology tools that you rely on?
The biggest one, just off the top of my head, is really Zapier. I'm big on automating everything inside of our business, and I probably have over 250 different Zaps that we use on the day-to-day. So we're on like the max Zapier plan, using the max amount of tasks every single month, but it gets things done very efficiently, and it allows us to build pretty complex systems. And I would say personally, it's something that I enjoy because I enjoy just, it's almost like Legos, right? Like seeing how things get put together and work.
And now there's going to be people listening that are like, what the is a Zap and Zapier, and how do you have 250 of these things? So can you give us a couple of specific examples of things that you've done to automate, or processes you've automated using Zapier?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say a lot of it is in like different areas. So like one would be reporting, for example. We have our CRM Close that we use, just Close.io, very similar to like Salesforce or any other like sales CRM. A lot of our reporting is just done automatically through there. And it's funny because just yesterday, one of our employees was out and I was having to go through and do the reporting myself. So I was having to do it manually for the first time in probably like 8 months. And it took me like an hour, right? It was kind of ridiculous. Where every day, Zapier, it triggers and we get that notification inside of our Slack channel. It just does it by itself. And when it comes to reporting, it's made my life a whole lot easier because every single day at 9 a.m., we get a sheet showing exactly like what our stats were for the day before, what our stats are for the month. So when it comes to reporting, it's definitely been a huge time saver. And then also on the client management side, at different check-in points, or when they've signed a contract, or when they've booked like an onboarding call, for example. And that way we can really just make sure that all of our clients are completing certain action items. And then for our client success team to identify like, oh, maybe this client didn't sign the contract right after they just got signed up 3 days ago. We need to follow up with them so they don't slip through the cracks. So I would say on the client success side, it's really helped with making sure that everything is running smoothly and that no clients are slipping through the cracks.
I was talking to my assistant Meredith the other day and I said, Mer, I think we need to get somebody to come in and do an audit of our business somehow and figure out what kinds of systems we could start automating using Zapier. And she goes, oh, we do. We've got a bunch of them. And I'm like, how many? She's like 10 or 12. I'm like, yeah, we're not even getting started. And I said, Jordan, I made up the number. I said, Jordan's got somewhere between 100 and 150 apps already set up. Like, we're missing something. We're missing something. So where does a company get started if they don't have the person in place who's got the kind of aptitude or skill set around this? Where do they get started at kind of doing an audit of the business, or how do they approach getting some things automated? And secondly, how do you decide what to automate and what to just continue manual because it's not worth the squeeze?
Yeah, I would say it's really anything that you're doing repetitively, anything that you're doing either daily or weekly or something that happens more than one or two times and takes your actual input. Like, especially as somebody that's running a company, you can't be updating spreadsheets for multiple hours per day. So that's like a very easy thing to automate when it comes to connecting Zapier, for example, to your CRM. I would say it's just identifying like what things you're spending unnecessary time on, not necessarily projects, but more of like those small tasks. And a lot of people, they kind of jump to like, I want to hire a VA or I want to hire an assistant to take care of these things. But I think a lot of money gets wasted because really, from what I've seen at least, a lot of these processes can be automated without having to have another person or another job.
So if you don't have a person internally that knows how to do this or where to go, where do you start? Do you hop on Upwork and go find somebody? What do you look for? Walk us through if we don't have a Jordan working for us, where do companies go?
Yeah, I would say hop on YouTube. Like I mentioned, a year ago, I started in this role and I didn't know a ton about operations, but I had learned a lot of it along the way. So I had a basic understanding of like Zapier and what it did at the time, but I had actually never set up a Zap before I started working at Growth Cave. And that was in February of 2021. A lot of this stuff is what I've learned like over the last year. And I would say I have gotten pretty good at it, but most of the beginning of it at least was from YouTube and just reading certain articles. And I would say there's trial and error that comes with it. There's times where I'm banging my head on the desk wondering why something doesn't work. But, when you work through those things and use the resources at your fingertips, it just makes your life a lot easier. So I would say learning these things yourself is important, because if you hire like a freelancer or someone to come into your business, they can build everything for you, but then you're going to have no idea how it actually works or functions. So I think it is important as a skill to learn yourself, especially in today's day and age where everything's just growing so quickly, and Zapier's releasing updates every single week. I would say it's almost up there with like ChatGPT and like its possibilities. So it's definitely an important skill to learn yourself.
That's interesting. Yeah, you can't outsource something that now you just have to know how to do it.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. And it is interesting how I was talking to somebody recently. They said they needed to go hire, it wasn't a VA, but they needed to hire somebody. I'm like, wait, the thought process you need to go through first are, do we need to even continue doing these tasks? Like, can we just stop them completely? If we're going to continue doing these tasks, can they be optimized? And then can they be automated? But there's no point in automating a bad system. So you need to kind of optimize the system first and then automate the system. And then if you can't automate it, then you outsource or delegate. Is that kind of the mindset that you go through as well, or how do you approach things?
Yeah, I would say one mindset that I've definitely kept over the last like 6 months is just being more resistant to hiring, because I think you've mentioned this a couple times, is that a lot of COOs, they're just like very quick to like, I want to hire. A lot of CEOs too, they're like, we just need to put somebody in this position. We just need to pay them X amount per month. And that's a really big expense. Even if you're hiring a virtual assistant, and let's say you're paying them $2,000 a month, I mean, that's a $24,000 a year commitment. If they're your company for 5 years, you're paying like $125,000 to an employee, when if this is a process that could have been automated, it might have cost you a couple grand, right? Over like the whole course of 5 years. So I would say it's just being resistant to spending more money. I'm definitely very frugal thinking when it comes to just the company and even just in my personal life. But, I would say it's just being resistant to those things. And also I do have the mindset of like wanting to automate everything. So that's kind of the first thing that comes to my mind. I just look of like, what can we erase or what can we automate?
It's amazing. All right. So the growth of the organization, you came in as employee kind of number one. You're now at 43. You're hiring 10 more the next month. What's changed in terms of the way that you're operating as a leader? What's substantially changed in the last 12 months?
I would say what's substantially changed is that now I am a leader, and now I have to be a leader, because when I first started as employee number one, it was just me hopping on with Lucas or our, newly hired second hire client success person or our sales team, right? So there was very little. We had maybe like 6 employees after my second month there. So there was like very little interaction when it came to management. It was just Lucas, right? So the difference is that now I do have to be a leader. Now I have teams under me. Now I have people that look up to me. Now I have people messaging me every single day. So I can't just like log out because there's people that rely on me. I would say it's that I've actually had to step into that role.
What about strategy? Are you and the two co-CEOs, do you guys spend much time in strategy, like kind of what if scenarioing in the future? And how do you approach that?
Yeah, I would say that's a lot of Lucas and Ozzy. And, I hear a lot of that from them, but really that's kind of like their expertise or where they think and where they communicate the most.
And then your expertise is just understanding the strategy or understanding the vision. How do you get on the same page with them on vision?
Yeah, I would say I get on the same page with vision by just being, like I mentioned earlier, more kind of statistical and operational with it. Like how are we actually going to get this done? Or like what things do I need to do to bring their ideas to life? So I would say really anything that they give me, anything that they tell me, the first thing I'm thinking of is like, okay, what's step number 1 and what's step number 10 in order to get it completed? What needs to happen in the middle? I'm kind of always thinking along the lines of like what needs to be implemented in order for these ideas that Lucas and Ozzy are bringing to the table to come to life.
You've never worked in a classic office environment where there's employees coming and going 9 to 5, 5 days a week kind of thing.
Yeah, not at all.
Do you think that your company is missing anything from not having that? Or how are you making sure that you have culture and communication and keeping people on the same page and knowing people are working on? How are you doing that and operating that way as a remote company?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I mean, I don't know what it's like to be in an office, so I wouldn't know the difference. And I would say we have a really good team dynamic, even though we're all virtual. For our sales team, for example, I mean, they're really all die hard. Like they love Growth Cave, they love our vision, they love what we do. And they're all very committed. And same with our client success team. And, we really kind of throw them the bone, give them new opportunities to grow within their personal lives and their professional lives. And they really step up to the plate, and we see a lot of improvement in our team. So I would say when it comes to the culture is that we focus a lot on helping our employees like improve their personal lives because it reflects in their work, right? Whenever an employee, for example, is moving out of the country, right? Wanting to move from like South Africa to the US, for example, that's a huge ordeal. A lot of companies, they might just be like, okay, cool, you can have like a week off. But for our case, we want to make sure that we can like uplift these employees and we can give them more than they've gotten in other roles. And like I mentioned, I haven't worked in a typical office environment, but we are really largely focused on helping everybody that works at Growth Cave, improve their personal lives because we know that's going to reflect on their work.
I love it. I've got a question for you that I've never been able to ask anyone before, because whenever I wrap up these episodes, I tell people that if they could go back and give their 20-year-old self some advice, what would it be? I mean, that's a ridiculous question because you're 20. So I'm going to flip this question. And I'm going to say, what advice would you give your 40-year-old self that you don't want to forget, that you know is working today, that you believe will be working 20 years from now? What do you want to tell your future self?
I would really just tell my future self maybe to slow down a little bit and enjoy the time that I have now. You're only going to be 20 once. I do enjoy being 20 and I enjoy, where we're at in the company, but I'm also very eager for the growth that we're experiencing and the growth that's to come. And I really do see the vision. And I know that when I'm 40, I'm going to look back and be like, man, if only I was 20 and we had only 40 employees and, we were much smaller and I could go back to that time. So I know that one day I'm going to be looking back on this time and really cherishing it. So I would really just tell myself to slow down and enjoy it, smell the roses a little bit. And that's actually something that Ozzy tells me all the time is take a step back, smell the roses and, just kind of enjoy where you are.
Great advice. I hope you heed it. I hope you remember it when you're 40.
Yeah. Easier said than...
What's that?
I said easier said than done when you're talking to a 20-year-old.
No, it's not. Because I think if you can allow that to sink in and it'll become part of your DNA. So it's a great lesson for yourself. Jordan Marksberry, the operations manager for Growth Cave. Thanks very much for sharing with us on the Second Command podcast.
Yeah. Thank you, Cameron.
No matter what job you're in and whatever that job might be, people are always watching. Doing your best and being excellent at what you're doing matters, even when you think you're in a job that's menial that people aren't paying attention to. Every job you do it with excellence or because you just never know who's watching you.